VRF and Bridge Domains. Okay, everyone. So now that we take a quick overview of what are networking options in ACI, when it comes to connecting the tenant into external networks or between different tenants, we discuss various options that ACI has to offer in that particular scenario. In this particular section, we are going to focus into the VRF and the bridge domains. And we want to discuss what is the purpose of each one, right? So the VRF, it's a route table. It's basically a route table designated to a particular resource on your tenant. In ACI, basically it gives you the advantage of separating your routes between different tenants. So you can assign a VRF to a particular tenant or even to a particular EPG and isolate those route tables. Instead of having one big route table, you then isolate each one individually, right? Let me give you this example. We got VLAN, and this is on the traditional side. So we got VLAN 10, we have a VLAN 20. In order for us to communicate between those two, we need to either leave the switch virtual interfaces on the default VRF, or you can then designate a different VRF for this one or a specific VRF for this one. Let me go ahead and clean this up real quick. So let's say we're not using the default VRF. And for those who doesn't know what a default VRF is, anything that you configure from a layer 3 standpoint on a layer 3 switch or router is by default going to fall in the default VRF, unless you specify that the forwarding VRF is a custom one that you built. So let's say we have VLAN 10 and VLAN 20. We don't want them to fall into the default VRF. We want to assign them a different VRF, and we say VLAN 10 and 20 is customer A. But then we bring another customer in, and we assign VLAN 30 and VLAN 40, and this will be customer B. Okay? This is a VRF for customer A. This is a VRF for customer B. Okay? I will not see any routes or any networks in customers B VRF because I am in customer A. So if customer A wants to know about the customer B networks, it needs to bridge or make a layer 3 adjacency or connectivity between those two, and then they start exchanging routes. If you're enabling dynamic routing protocols, then you start, advertising that neighborship and start exchanging routes. Or you can go static, right? So you can do some route leaking, which is basically import and export your route targets between different VRFs. Or an ACI is basically a contract. So when you build a contract and you specify that the contract is between VRFs, then basically once you connect customer A and you attach that contract to customer B, and let's say customer A is an EPG and customer B is also an EPG, once you attach that contract, then you can start exchanging communication between the two or exchanging routes, and then the ACI fabric will do all on the fly. You actually don't need to do that route leaking function. It will be done by ACI. In the only case where you manually need to specify what I want to learn from the endpoint group is when you are trying to communicate to an external site. And that is where we configure a route policy and we add the import and export subnets. So we export what we know, we import what we want to get, right? So we import from my site inside the fabric and we export what we know out to the site. Don't worry, we're going to take a look at that very detailed in an upcoming video. Okay, speaking of VRFs, so we already know that a VRF holds routes and networks for a particular tenant or a particular resource inside the tenant. Let's take a look at our tenant right here. We have tenant web SRV farm, and we have a VRF called web SRV VRF. Bridge domains are my actual networks attached to the endpoint group. It's just like a VLAN, very similar, but allows you to not actually tag the traffic using a particular 802.1q tag, because the bridge domain does not have a VLAN tag. It allows you to classify the network into its own little domain and then between different bridge domains. Okay? What is the purpose of a VRF? It allows bridge domains to route. So it allows communication between bridge domains, between tenants, or between layer 3 outs, in this case, external routed domains. Okay, so we have a VRF. The VRF communicates bridge domain, bridge domain. That's one way to communicate with a VRF. So the VRF allows you to communicate between bridge domains. Another way, the VRF communicates a tenant to also a layer 3 out. And by the way, you can assign different VRFs to different endpoint groups and still allow to route as long as there is a contract between the two. So you got to make sure that you understand that everything in ACI requires a contract in order for communication to happen. So you need to allow it. It's just like a firewall. You need to allow the traffic going through. Even though that you have the routes, that doesn't mean that it's going to work unless you specifically allow that communication to happen. Okay? Again, bridge domains allows me to assign a network and provide the network, the subnet or the addressing to my endpoint groups, right? So you can actually assign a bridge domain to an endpoint group, then assign the subnet inside the bridge domain. How do you allow it to communicate to another bridge domain, in this case to another endpoint group? You need to assign it to a VRF. You need to map that bridge domain onto a VRF, okay? Let's go ahead. One thing is talking about it, whiteboarding it. Another thing is actually seeing live in ACI. So let's go ahead and jump into the APIC and let's do some quick configurations and you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, now that we're inside our APIC, let's go ahead and take a look at the VRF that we already configured. And remember, on the web SRV farm tenant, we configured those two endpoint groups. You remember the app and the database SRVs? We have to assign the endpoint groups to a VRF or else it's not going to route. So the way you do that is, remember, endpoint groups are attached to bridge domains. Bridge domains are attached to VRFs. So let me go back to my slide so you can understand how everything fits together. Okay, so we mentioned, let me draw it right here on my upper left corner, bridge domains to VRF, EPG to bridge domains, right? So we got endpoint group to bridge domain, bridge domains to VRF. So now that we saw that, basically app SRVS, it's attached to bridge domain app SRV as a BD, okay? And the same will go to database. So let me take a look at database SRVS. This is the endpoint group, and I should be attached to, yes, DB SRVS a BD, okay? Once we get into the bridge domain, remember the order, endpoint group, bridge domain, VRF. So you see, attached to VRF, web SRV, VRF. We go down into the database, we are also attached to the same VRF. And this is one way to do it. You can attach both bridge domains onto the same VRF, or if you need to isolate routes between those two endpoint groups, then you attach them to separate VRFs, okay? So let me show you how you confirm what networks do we have on the web SRV VRF, because it's very hard for us just to keep clicking and looking and seeing what actually is attached to what, right? So there's ways to do that. And for that, we need to do a SSH connection onto our APIC. So let me go ahead and bring up PuTTY, and I'm just going to do a quick SSH and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so I am currently consoled into my APIC. So I just did it in a quick SSH connection to my APIC's management interface. And now through the APIC, I can go ahead and do a show IP route for my tenant VRF. And that will show me what is currently either attached as local, because it's just like a switch virtual interfaces. Our bridge domain is going to look in ACI just like a switch virtual interface, an SVI. And in order for us to validate that, we are going to do a very similar command. The only difference is that we have to attach to a leaf. Right now, if you see here, and on our last section on this training, I'm going to discuss the console-based access and what we can do in the console, okay? So in order for us to attach ourselves to a leaf, we are going to change the mode into bash. It's the bash console. Now we are in the bash console. From there, we can say attach, and the leaf hostname. In this case, I want to attach myself to leaf 101, press enter, and now it's asking me the password for the leaf, which is exactly the same password that you use to log into your Epic. And voila, I am connected into leaf 1, okay? So how do we see from a leaf the route table for a particular VRF? Very simple. Show IP route VRF. Okay, very important. First thing, the name of the tenant. In this case is web srv -farm, right? Now, VRF name, web srv -vrf. Enter, and there you have it. And again, this is the command. Show IP route VRF, call the tenant. That's the tenant name, web srv farm, and this is the VRF that we have configured inside that tenant. Once we press enter, we see a very similar route table, just like NXOS, just like your layer 3 core. What we have, directly connected networks. This is the endpoint group for the app SRVS. This is the endpoint group for the database SRVS. So this is a bridge domain. And let me show you, this is the default gateway for the app SRVS EPG. And this is the default gateway for the database EPG. Okay, so if you want to confirm, let's go back into the Epic and let me show you where all this information. And we see here, web SRV-VRF. Let's go on to bridge domain app SRVS layer 3. And there you have it. That is my default gateway for the app SRVS EPG. Same with database SRVS, and this is my default gateway for the database SRVS. If we go back onto PuTTY, let me show you. Same thing. So I just learned this from the leaf. I am able to see the information on the VRF. And instead of me chasing what is attached onto this VRF, I can just go and attach myself on the console, show IP route VRF, and then the tenant : VRF name. There you have it. This video is for you to get familiar with the order of connectivity. Again, endpoint group, and we see it right here. Endpoint group first, right? We have the endpoint group. The endpoint group connects to the bridge domain, and the bridge domain connects to the VRF. Once we do that show IP route that we just saw on the console, I am going to see all the networks that are attached to my VRF. So all my bridge domains attached to this particular VRF are going to be shown in the console as we just saw in my previous example. Okay? So in our next video, we're going to do layer 3 outs and we're going to do some route leaking. Oh, it's going to be very fun. So stick around. Let's go and jump into the next video. Okay, everyone, in our next video, we're going to take a look at inter and intra-tenant communications and contract interfaces. Thank you for watching.